Hey, I hope you are all doing good. So yeah, for today, I was actually planning towards to get some topics and hands-on for the architecture of components in Angular because it's very foremost and important for Angular developers to make the architecture of components on Angular in a bit way that to manage the complexity without a state management solution like Rx and like topmost other solutions as the scenario for like comparison for managing the state in the Angular application. So it's totally dependent on the architecture of components. So if you guys are having a good hands-on to making the architecture of components in a good way, so you don't need to deep dive with the state management like Rx and all other solutions. So yeah, today we are actually looking for that. So before starting that, let me get some introduction for myself. I am working in a software industry from 5+ years as a full stack developer, as a front end developer, mostly for Angular and the React applications, so the JavaScript side mostly. So today's talk is about whether you should or you should not use Rx. So is there a better way to avoid state altogether? Yeah. So what this talk covers, it's about the type of components in Angular, how many types of components, and where should the state live in Angular applications. Let's cover the types of components. So the first type of component in Angular there are 3 types of components. One is like container components, second one is presentational components, and third one is layout components. So let's from now onwards we are getting the deep details for these 3 types of components and how these are useful in Angular application and how we are going to use these. So first of all, the presentational components. So these components are actually the dumb components having no state. For the communication, we are actually using input and output decorators for these presentational components. Like presentational components are always known as like to showing the modal or like showing the reusable component of card and like menus. So these type of components are actually known as presentational components. And the second one is container components. So yeah, these are very smart and connect presentational components together and handles immediate events. Like container components are like the whole scenario, like the main component. Like in React we have a higher order component. So yeah, in Angular we have actually container components. Container components are very smart, and these connects actually the small type of presentational components. So if you are looking here, if you are looking on the screen for the dashboard view, so the main component which actually allocates these all are tables, cards, side menus, headers. So the main component is actually containing these presentational components, small components like these chart area chart example, bar chart example. So these are actually the presentational components. The container component is actually the main parent which actually holds these small presentational components. So from child component like these area chart example, the container component is actually responsible to send the data which is actually mapped in the chart view. So the presentational components area chart example is taking the data by the means of input decorator, because if a parent component is actually sending the data to the child, so then here comes in the input decorators. So yeah, these are actually the container components. The concepts of container component is to reallocate and to actually hold the small presentational components. The third one is actually the layout components like header, footer, sidebar, nav bar. So these type of components are known as layout components, which actually perform these layout parts. Layout components doesn't share data and doesn't need to update any data while state and all the things. So they have actually the animations or some state for toggling and all the things. So yeah, other than that, there isn't any type of these type of data to be integrated in it. So the important part in the Angular application, getting started, is actually the data flow, how the Angular data flow is working. So yeah. In this picture, you are currently viewing the main is actually the container component. After the container components, we have layout components like header, footer, and all the things. In the layout, let's suppose in the above picture, actually, as we see, so this is actually the main component, and this is actually the container. And here we have the layout components for header, sidebar. So, and in between this dashboard and chart areas and card areas, this is actually the main area where the presentational components are performed. So yeah, container component, layout components, and presentational components are actually viewing together in a way. So the main container component, which actually holds your presentational components, are here at the top right, it's the right side. And the container components, actually the activated route is connected with the container component. Shared services are also connected with the container component. HTTP client is actually connected to the container component. So HTTP client is for to serving the APIs to get the response, and because all the data is actually getting into the container component. So this is the responsibility of container component to send the data to small presentational components, as we see in a previous example of dashboard. So yeah, if a container component, which means a parent component, wants to send the data to the presentational small components reusable like cards and all the things, so we have to use the input decorator for that, to sending the data from container to presentational layer. And if presentational component like cards and these small reusable components, if they want to send the data back to the parent on any activity, on any act, so here we can use output decorator with the emitted events. Yeah. So here comes a warning, because if an input decorator that only exists to pass data through the deeper presentational components, in this scenario you are abstracting the wrong level. This means actually if a container component having the presentational components, and inside the presentational component if you have more presentational components, so this is actually the two layers of input decorators which are actually perform the data only to send the data. So this is actually the foremost thing, which is actually container component is actually responsible to send the data from child to parent. So if you are using presentational inside the presentational component, so here comes the two input decorators level, which is actually the wrong abstraction layer. How do we need state? So yeah, when do we actually need the state? So answer is interface between data and the component. So state is actually every container component have the state. So what's the state means? State is actually to hold the data for the component where it is being consumed or it is being used. So keep why and what's the need for using the state. So the second one point is to keep the data consistent across all the components, so to perform communication between the components. So yeah, here comes, if you see in a picture like the component here, and its UI and the state is actually throughout this component. So to making use of state is a good practice, while in its separate component have their separate state. So this is actually the best example for consuming the state, because every component have their own state, and UI interaction with the state is very in a better way, in a good way. Types of state. So there are here we are actually having three types of state. So one is actually server state, the second one is application state, and the third one is page specific state. So in the previous slide I have discussed with that every page specific state is a good solution, while widely if you are consuming the state throughout the application, so the complexity of the application is very complex. It's twice complex. So yeah, if you want to if you don't want to dive into the complexities of like consuming the state throughout the application, so you have to avoid the deeper state usage of throughout the application. So you can use only the container state for like every container component have their own state. So this is actually the best example for consuming this. options to manage state are actually there are multiple options in Angular to manage the state, like Angular services, like NGRX objects and observables. So you can actually consume that and make Angular services to actually communicate with between the components. So throughout this, you can also manage the state as well. Angular routers and URLs, actually query params and these type of optional parameters, you are actually you can also manage the state while via router and URLs as well. And the component state, like every component have their own state. If you want to share the state between two components, so you can use Angular services with Rxjs. Observables, replay subject and behavior subject. These are all types of from the Rxjs. You can consume these and make Angular services so that you can easily update to communication between the two components. So I will actually show you the code snippets for that as well. And the state management libraries are the fourth one. These are like NGRX and all other libraries. They are also used for managing the state as well. But we for Angular services, Angular routers, component state, these are also the types through which you can actually manage the state in Angular application. So example of Angular service, if you are taking the example of Angular service, if you want to manage the state using the Angular service, let's for the first step, you can make the interface of user, which is, let's suppose now we are taking the example for user service and user interface. So first of all, make the user interface, which is actually having the multiple types like ID, name, avatar, country, blah, blah, blah. So yeah. Angular service now, this is actually the service you have to make, which is actually injecting service you can use in any components as well. So this is for on the second line, it is actually consuming this above interface we have just created. So this is actually consuming this user interface. So and here on the third line, I have imported the replay subject, which is actually the part from Rxjs library. In this, I have used the user variable and I have consumed this replay subject user. Replay subject is actually using in Angular to take the step level to hold the data. If you want to hold the data for 2 steps, so you have to pass in circular brackets, you have to pass 2. So it was actually responsible to handle the state for two steps. And if you want to if you want to store the replay subject to store the state or to store the data for 3 layers, so you have to pass it 3. Let's suppose and after that I have made the set user method, which is actually responsible to take the input for the user and to store the user in a replay subjects. This is actually consuming of service. How do we consume the service we have made? So this is get user from service method. In any type of component you have to make, and this dot user service is actually the constructor. You have consumed the service we have previously built, and we are actually using the get user method. If you want to use a behavior subject or observable, so it will update the data on every like if I have sent the data for user Awais, so let's suppose there are 4 components which are actually consuming this service, so 4 of the components will get that updated value for that record. So for now, this one. So the second part is like how router and URLs to use for managing the state. So router and URLs are actually persisting the state in the router, while Angular moreover Angular 7.0 above 7.0 we have actually the navigation extras as well, which is actually taking the query parameters as input. So yeah, persist the data in route with the state navigate to desired page, hold state navigate to page, share the state. As you see, product/id is now replaced with a product, this one. So while in route you are mentioning this one with the colon id. So when you call that route and passed some id on that, so it will actually replace the browser in a way like so. Yeah. routers are actually holding the state, and let's suppose you are sending the data, and after some logic you are now making your application to route on some other page, like as Angular router, this route dot navigate URL. So on these type of things, actually after that they hold state on that moment, and when you navigate to page, the holding state is actually now on the turns of sharing the state. So these are actually the 4 types of router and URL state management types. So first is required parameters, second one is optional parameters, third one is query parameters, and fourth one is, this is actually the updating and the new in the Angular, which is actually navigation extras. I have also written that some code snippets and a small article over dev.to as well. So this actually accepts the query parameter. So how we can use, so as you see in snippet, we have this path movie/id, and the component is movie detail component. So this is actually the activated route. So when you send the router link as in a view like this to take the params, and I have passed the URL /movies, and I'm sending the object for movie.id. So yep. And also you can send from the TypeScript file as well, this.router.navigate, and the first param is like your path, which you are suggesting to move on, and second one is the ID. Okay. So when you open that URL in the browser, so the resulting URL will be like localhost 4200/movie/5. So hope you guys can get this point, and actually you can get that ID in your routed component as well, this.route.snapshot param map.get ID. So you can call this line in your ng-on-init method for any component, so you can get the ID, which is actually coming from your parent component. Some tips to architect your Angular app, which is actually foremost rule, like while most of you guys are actually doing freelance as well, or some of you are like or doing job as a developer or somewhere else. So yeah, this is actually the most important role for you to take the start an Angular application in a way that after some time, if it will evolve or it will extend, so it will be capable for that. Like I have seen multiple example and listen the queries from my junior devs and junior friends as well who have started their career. So most of the times they are actually starting the application either in freelance client or something else, or in a job as well. So once after some time, like 5 to 6 months, when the scope of application is going bigger, so it will actually the hectic for the persons to manage that type of like if it not built over the good architect or good mindset, so the application is actually very hectic for you to maintain. So these are actually some tips how you can make your Angular application so modular approach. So in the future it will extend, so it will easily extend, you can easily extend it. So the first tip for that is lazy loading modular approach. So like this is the most important part to choose your application. Like don't make the components like home page and all other pages. Most of the developers are like making the components in the form of like making the pages in the form of components like home component, about, contact us, orders, product list, and these are not actually the components, these are actually the modules. So you can select these as a module, so make all the page level approach in the module level. So this is actually the very basic perform. So the second one is separate out your container components from presentational ones. Like if you are, let's suppose we are actually making the order list or home page dashboard component, let's suppose. So we have to make our dashboard as a module. So if you have created your dashboard as a module, so after that inside that module you have to make one container component for that, which is actually the whole contain, which is actually the whole container for the your dashboard module. And it's inside your dashboard container component you have to call your small reusable components like cards, charts. So in this way your application is very very consistent in while usage, and in future you will enjoy working on it. So yeah, for the third one is actually reduce application wide state to module wise state. As I earlier mentioned, this one, like if you are using NGRX and you are like suggesting to, like you have a point in your mind to maintain the state throughout the application level, so it's very complex after some time to manage that one. So reduce these type of state, global state, so you can move these states to your modular type approach. Like you have a dashboard module, so the state is only for dashboard module, and you have the orders module, creation, listing, updating. These all type of container components are inside your orders module. So your order module is only have their separate state for managing the orders and all the things. So in this manner your application will be good. Thank you. So yeah, hope you guys have enjoyed.